referred to the Kyiv Zvirynetsky caves.
Yes.
Where exactly were they?
They are right beside the St. Jonas Monastery, not too far from the Kyivan caves, Lavra. I've never been there myself. I know that they are open to the public. They have a thriving monastic community, which is still very primitive because the archaeologists are still doing their work. And you can go down the stairs like you would in the Kyivan caves. There are chapels there, and instead of relics encased in beautiful coffins or arks, they're just piles of the bones of the venerable fathers there. So they still have an awful lot of work to do. And of course, in communist times, it was impossible to. Saint Joseph Stalin, he was an aristocrat. He spent his fortune paying archaeologists and trying to rebuild that monastery, and he became the human of the local fledgling monastic community that was being built around it.
And has the community venerated any particular monks or saints at that particular site?
Yes. Well, actually, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, has glorified all of them, of which I think about 17 are known. There is a list of them. Saint Leonty, Bishop of Rostov, is probably one of the better known ones. Saint Menas, Bishop of Polotsk, and others. They were trained there. The Tatars, when they were still pagan, attacked and destroyed it. We know that Saints Sergius and Herman of Valaam Monastery in the north, in Finland, were also trained at that Zvirynetsky monastery, and they moved north to avoid the ongoing attacks by various enemies. Yes.
So this is a two-pronged question. One is, what do you see as the role of critical historiography and its potential? Perhaps it's somewhat at some level potential both to subvert received narratives about the saints, perhaps also to galvanize them, but very often also to put into question the details that have come down to us in the liturgical forms of these biographies and hagiography that we proclaim, and even in the iconography and certainly the hymnography of the Valaam fathers and the work they did on sort of that. But specifically then the role of historiography in both, how does that intersect with hagiography, and how does it bear down upon instances where one church's saint is another person's heresiarch? So, the treatment of Jacob of Saurag and Dioscorus and Severus among the Oriental Orthodox, who we have specific hymns in the Byzantine Rite where we demonize these fellows. Yes. More recently, Saint Joseph Stalin, for example, and how he's regarded by the Orthodox and regarded as a saint by us.
Well, a book can be written by what you just said, and I think a book has been written. But also, it's interesting, the ecumenical breadth of the Kyivan Church. Not only sending missionaries throughout the world, China, Alaska, Serbia. St. John Maximovich ordained the first Spanish Orthodox priest. He founded the French Orthodox Church. He founded the Dutch Orthodox Church. He established, he took the Filipino Orthodox, and he took children, orphans, Ukrainian, Russian, Chinese, Filipino, to San Francisco, where he built the Church of Our Lady, Joy of All Who Sorrow, 6251 Geary Boulevard, if you wanted to write down that address and visit it. That's where he is enshrined. That's where Natalie Wood gave a good portion of her fortune when her husband knocked her off. No, I'm sure he didn't. I'm sure he didn't.
I don't think they even know who Natalie Wood is.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really dating myself.
Yeah,
a great, famous actress in her day, quite the... Yes.
So the Ukrainian background.
Yes.
What was her real... What's her...
Daterovo.
What is it?
Daterovo.
Daterovo.
Wood. No, I'm just joking.
She had a lot of things.
Yeah, but and she gave a lot of money for that great church, and all the orphans were the ones who carried his tomb up to the church when he was canonized, a saint. But getting back to your question specifically, yes, as we talked earlier, Saint Timothy Ailuros, the cat, the Patriarch and Pope of Alexandria of the Miaphysite tradition, was actually banished to Tauria. And Dioscoros, Saint Dioscoros, apparently was in Paphlagonia, somewhere not too far away from there for a while. Patagonia, not too far away from there. So that area was really the dumping ground, the Australia of the Roman Empire, the Botany Bay, and many excommunicated Christians from the Imperial Church found their way there. And that's why, for example, in the Ukrainian Church, in the museums, they found Coptic icons in Tauria, in Chersones. Also crosses, Coptic crosses, that were seen by Saint Vladimir when he went there ostensibly to push the Greeks out, but basically to sue for peace in terms that would have been beneficial to him socially and politically. So there is a very close relationship from the spiritual cultural point of view between the Kyivan Church and the Coptic heritage. Certainly we know that the Coptic tradition of reciting the 12 Psalms at a time, revealed ostensibly by an angel and also in the rule of Saint Pachomius, was brought by Saint Dositheus, the archimandrite of the Kyivan caves, to Kiev, and that is, to this day, an alternative way of praying the Psalter in the Kyivan tradition. Not just the Byzantine way, but the Coptic way as well. And it's actually a very beautiful way. It's really encumbered with a lot of troparia and kontakia, which I don't think the early Coptic monastics would have used. But nonetheless, the inspiration is still from as well as the Celtic tradition, St. Patrick and the other Celtic saints who were inspired by the Celtic saints. And we know that in Ireland itself, there was a devotion to the 7 Coptic monks in Ireland who were buried there. Speaking to the first part of your question, and could you remind me about the first part of your question?
What's the role of critical historiography?
Critical historiography.
In the extent that it proves subversive of our hallowed history?
Yes. Two points. One is that because the archaeologists who are involved, they're pious people, but they work in tandem with the church. So, for example, in Chersones, in that area of Crimea, they come across a shrine, as happened recently. The church is called to the site because the archaeologists would like to know specifically what certain things are, whether it's an altar, a cross, perhaps an instrument used in the celebration of the Eucharist, of Holy Communion. For a lot of these archaeologists trained under the Soviet system, these things are foreign. So they directly involve priests and the church in these matters. For example, also when they were, we know that Saint Clement's body was actually enshrined in a submerged Greek city. As a result of an earthquake, the city went right underwater. And when Saint Clement had the anchor tied around his neck, his body sunk to one of the buildings underwater. And to this day, as Orthodox priests put on scuba gear to dive with archaeologists, they've developed a paraliturgical tradition that every year around November 25th, actually on the old calendar it's December the 8th, the feast of Saint Clement of Rome, they put on scuba gear and still continue to dive underwater to pray, to say the Moleben in this submerged Greek city, in the ruins of the Greek city. The Anglo-Catholic Church in Philadelphia of Saint Clement's, they actually recovered 2 pillars, 2 Greek Corinthian columns from this submerged city in Kazacha Bay, which is now St. Clement's Bay, and they had them transported to Philadelphia, and they are enshrined in this Church of St. Clement in Philadelphia from 1840. And they have a beautiful shrine of Our Lady that they because they're playing on the word Clement, Our Lady of Clemency. And of course, in England, he was the patron saint for the Danes. He was a patron saint against drowning, even though he himself was drowned. But the English children would go from house to house singing songs in honor of Saint Clement around November 25th. And people would give them little oranges, which came to be called clementines.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Clement, but he is a very much Ukraine saint in this way. He was a universal teacher, universal father, but very much the founder, the very real founder, much more so than St. Andrew, which his visit, a lot of people, critical historians would say is of a legendary character. Perhaps not, but certainly St. Clement was there, and we know that the veneration of his anchor, which is present in his Trezub. So basically what I'm saying is that the archaeologist and the critical historian, under the circumstances in which they are faced today, are working in tandem with the church. When the church does not know, the archaeologist cannot find the name of the saint. The church does not concoct one. They simply puts them into the calendar because the shrine is there. Clearly there are all the markings of a very strong liturgical cult in honor of that saint. They put him into the calendar as such, and the archaeologists continue their work. The Church of the Tithe had it...
Which one you're talking about?
In Kyiv, Saint Vladimir and Saint Yaroslav the Wise were building a large church based on 1/10 of the wealth of all of the boyars, princes, and dukes. That's what it was called, the Church of the Tithe. The icon of the Virgin of Vladimir to this day now has been renamed at the suggestion of critical historians and archaeologists by the church as Our Lady of the Tithe. And that's where she was first enshrined. This is where the relics of Saints Boris and Lib were enshrined. Those relics are lost now, except for small particles which are in the collection of the Kyivan caves Lavra, along with those of Saint Vladimir and Saint Olha. So they work together, and what is the amazing thing about this is that one can actually go and touch and see the relics of these saints and holy ones who have been underground for centuries. In Pochayiv, in western Ukraine, there is the famous Our Lady of Pochayiv, the Lourdes of Eastern Europe, where Our Lady appeared to a shepherd and a monk. A lot of the monks of the Kyivan caves Lavra escaped to the west in Volyn, and she appeared holding a scepter. And they came rushing towards her. She didn't say anything. She was ensconced in flames, and then she disappeared. What was left was what many people say is her footprint on a rock. And from that footprint, water started to flow. People started to drink it. Now, critical historians, archaeologists say that it has a very high calcium content. And it's a very healthy water from a mineral point of view. It has a lot of solid minerals and healthful elements. But in addition to that, it has the power to cure in a much more dramatic way that minerals and herbs cannot. There was a fellow with a heart condition who came there, and he was taking the water, and he was cured. His ejection fraction went from 25 to 80 something.
Are you making a suggestion?
Actually, I
hear that you also have
cardiomyopathy. Yeah, it's.
You do much better than me.
Well, but
we're all a little field trip.
Yeah, we should go there together.
You got to have heart, and that's. I think maybe this is just a sign that maybe we should resuscitate the devotion to the Sacred Hearts. I know. We've
not that
safe. So they do work together, and in Pochayiv, the Saint Job of Pochayiv, Saint Methodius, who was the first monk from way back when, who founded the monastery there, is venerated, and also a recent Ukrainian saint, Amphilochius. He was an ethnic Ukrainian who actually helped members of the Ukrainian underground, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. 3 of them wounded came to the monastery, and within a couple of days they were healed of their wounds, and they got up and went off to continue to kill Russians. And the woman, the lady who was one of the underground's nurses, obviously not a very great believer, but she thought that he had used some kinds of special herbs to heal these 3 wounded soldiers. I wonder what he used to get them back on their feet again in so short order. He was arrested, put into a insane asylum, where he told the warden of the prison, I can heal all these people in a matter of a week. And the warden said, okay, go ahead. Let's see you do it. And he said, well, I need my cross, I need my holy water, and I need my gospel. And the warden said, no, you heal these people without those things. And Amphilochius threw up his hands and said, would you send a soldier into battle without his arms? And at one night, a woman came into the prison with a letter for the warden, and the warden ordered Amphilochius to be released. And this woman was none other than the daughter of Joseph Stalin himself, who experienced a healing at his prayers. That's how he was released. He was very often, and just one more thing, because the nice thing about these saints is that these little snippets of their lives really show the power of the Holy Spirit, how he acts through the temples, his temples, which are the saints, at which we are also called. But some students went to him and said, Father, we're very nervous. We have these nervous problems. We're taking aspirin and pills, and some of them were taking drugs, and we can't control it. We're just nervous. The studies are killing us. And he said, you're nervous? So he prescribed a number of Jesus prayers with full prostrations to the floor. I think the one was started with 300, and the other one got 700. 2 weeks later, they came back to see him, and he said, oh, you nervous ones, come over here. Are you still nervous? I said, no, Father, it all went away. It all went away. We're fine.
We don't have energy. Do we?
So these are the kinds of holy fathers and elders who knew the whole human condition and who could prescribe careful spiritual medicine for it.
Sorry, what was the name of that? You said first monk of Pochayiv.
Oh, Job.
No, but you're talking about Amphilokio. You're talking about the one that healed the Upuchi, or I mean, what?
He said first monk of Pochayiv.
Oh, the first monk was Methodius. Methodi. He is enshrined in one of the Sket chapels off the main course, and.
This is just amazing. You know, you really do have to write a book.
Yes.
And what I would is, you know, including the full critical dimension, because, you know, as you know very well, there's a lot of literature about, you know, Pope Saint Clement, etc., and the various. But I think that you know, if you were willing to do that, and then just allow, especially the more recent accounts, to speak for themselves and say, listen, this is, you know, this is what's out there. I think people would be just blown away. And you know that, if I may add this for the sake of the camera here, you know, for anyone watching this who's disinclined to, you know, be very, shall we say, be very what? Yeah, precisely. To be skeptical about this sort of thing. You want to read a newly published book by Eric Metaxas, who's he's an outstanding author. It's entitled Miracles, and you know, it's a very, very substantial book dealing with some of the most modern responses to the usual objections. So I just want to mention that because I think that when people think about, you know, churches in these far off, you know, the obscure and therefore kind of pro-obscurantist sort of places, there's a tendency to just kind of poo-poo this, you know, and yet I think that you know, there are all sorts of trends within, you know, the very, very scientifically oriented Western culture to validate, you know, a lot of the kinds of things that you've been saying. Along those lines, the question that I have for you, actually I have two. One about Our Lady of Vladimir. I'd never heard that icon was originally, you know, because it's always identified by Ukrainians as Our Lady of Veshchora.
Right.
And so I didn't know that it had been at the Disciplina Tsar. But so I want you to say a little bit more about that. The other one, you know all, of course, about the Soviet expertise, as they called them, these groups in the early 20s, the communists who would go into places like the Pechersk Lavra and open up the sarcophagi, etc. Do you know what the Soviets did, how they approached the head of Saint Clement, what they did, and how did it manage to survive the whole the Soviet period?
Yes.
Anyway, so those are two questions.
Can I start with your second one first?
Sure.
The attitude of the Soviets towards relics and the historical way in which they approached them was very similar to that of, and I don't mean to offend anyone anywhere, the approach of the Protestant Reformation towards saints' relics in England and elsewhere. So, for example, if throughout England they would bring statues of Our Lady, venerated statues of Our Lady of Walsingham and others, and they would burn them in public. Saints' relics burnt in public. But when it came to Westminster Abbey, where they had the relics of Saint Edward, the Confessor, they left them alone. They would not touch them because he was, after all, their king. There was a secular role for Saint Edward the Confessor to be played out that cut across denominational lines. In the same way that in the Pechersk Lavra, the communists, while they wanted to put down or to attack the Scientific Academy of Moscow, and I'm thinking of what they did, the Moscow Scientific Journal did with the relics of Saint Theodosius, Archbishop of Chernihiv, where they took the Saint Pachomiy, the new martyr, who was a martyr later, Archbishop of Pachomiy, ordered him to put on liturgical gloves, which they would never touch the relics themselves, and they opened up the casket and had them lift up the remains of Saint Theodosi. At that time, the Soviets were amazed at what they saw, and had to admit in a journal article that this saint had indeed had his relics preserved after so many years, after 200 years. So there were cases like that, which converted Soviets, who became underground Orthodox Christians and were later martyred for that. So at the same time, another example is the Holy Fire of Jerusalem, which was often taken to Kyiv. Danilo Apostle brought the fire as a pilgrim. But today I think there's an airline that brings it. But one student who didn't believe went to Jerusalem, and he was going to poo-poo the whole thing. He had his lantern, and he wanted to know what the Patriarch with the other two Oriental Orthodox bishops were doing inside the tomb of our Lord. And as he heard the song Christos Anesti sung for the first time, his lantern lit up. And he escaped, and he came to the United States and wrote an article about it and how that converted him. So they did this.
God approves of the Julian calendar.
And in one case, for example, a Russian pilot, a communist, was traveling through the Caucasus, and there were monks that were hiding, and he would actually gun them down, machine gun them down, as they were running. And then he saw a group of monks running, and he saw them come to a precipice, and he says, "I got them now," and he cocked his machine guns, which are on those primitive airplanes, and swooped down. And as he was flying at them, he was going to get right up close so he can see the blood spurting with every bullet in these monks. He saw the monks kneel down, cross themselves, and then walk over the air over to the other side and escape. He turned around, flew to Germany, and escaped to the United States and lived to write about it. So I wasn't there. I was on Patmos. I visited the cave where St. John the theologian wrote the book of Revelation and probably his gospel. I came out, this was on my honeymoon, I came out, and this very...
He's happily married.
and this old monk, barely walking, frail. He can barely walk so much that he has to hang on to the stairs as he's walking down, and he's smiling at me. And the tour went ahead with my wife. And I was just the church of St. John the Theologian. And I'm looking up at him, and his beautiful, brilliant smile, his beautiful eyes, and he's speaking to me in Greek, and of course it was Greek to me. And I kissed his hand. I could feel how leathery and rubbery his hands were. It was like a skeleton with just a little bit of skin on them. But it was real. I grasped his hand. And I looked up at him. He's saying things again to me. It sounded like he was giving a blessing. And I thought, you know, Tanya, my wife, has to meet this wonderful fellow. I turn around like this, and I turn back, and he's gone. Wow. And I run, this scary thing comes up. I've never experienced that before in my life, to have someone disappear. I knew that it was impossible for him to go anywhere. I ran. I went into the church. I spoke to one of the younger monks who spoke English. I said, this monk I met, he said, there's no monk like that here. Wow. And 30 years later, sitting in Queen's Park, I was going through John Sanidopoulos' website. He's a Greek Orthodox layman with all kinds of Orthodox articles. And he has icons of all the saints of Patmos. And I'm looking at him, scrolling down. And I hit on one icon, and I'm feeling the same, 30 years later, the same cold. It was the monk that I had met.
Wow, amazing.
Is it possible, Professor?
It's just fine.
Blessing on you to your future mission.
Well, I would like to think that. But thank you. Yeah.
So we've got an adventure for you. Our Augustinus is uber connected to the Ethiopian Church.
Oh, wonderful.
So if you want to go do what you've done to the Kyivan Church with the Ethiopian Church and render service to the worldwide church by helping their tradition get widely known, which I'm sure is as rich.
Yep, I have a great devotion to St. Pontius Pilate.
He will help you meet the right people.
Oh, actually, yeah.
Where these kinds of things are also happening.
Oh, that's marvelous. Well, it's a very vibrant, beautiful tradition, and of course there are Ethiopian icons they found in Tauria. How they got there is anyone's guess, but they found them in Tauria.
Do you mind going back to Our Lady of Veshvorod,
yes,
Vladimir, and the Church of the Tides? Because is that something? I mean, I don't have the knowledge that you do.
No.
So is the association of that icon with the Church of the Tides? Is that something that's actually somewhere in the Chronicles, or is this something that's been recently?
It was recently discovered. That's where it was enshrined. Vishhorod was, as we know, a village north of Kyiv, right. Which is also where the miraculous icon of St. Nicholas the Drenched was kept. And that's where that miracle happened when people were traveling by boat. But the Deshatinda, the Church of the Tithe, was where this icon, which was unique in the sense that it did not have the sternness of the traditional Greek icon. It was the child, the divine child, is kissing, not only hugging, but he's kissing his mother. And there is a very quaint, wonderful humanity about the mother of God's eyes as she's hugging her child. It's almost as if she knows that this is not all going to be, good things and joyfulness in her life with this child, but she hangs on to him. And Vishhorod, one of the.
So may I ask, so where has this been recently discovered? And what are the sources for connecting Our Lady of Vladimir / Vishhorod to the Church of
the archaeologists themselves, because they found writings. It's very common to find copies of prayer books that have somehow withstood the test of time, buried. In the Kyiv Zvirynetsky Monastery, they found paramans, monastic paramans, prayer books, prayer ropes, portions of prayer ropes, other monastic uniforms buried in the soil. And with this, it was the archaeologists who said, you really need to rename this icon. The church examined it and said that, yeah.
Was Augustine, and then last question from you.
So at the risk of the reputation that Brian was just starting to give me, I would ask a critical question, if I may. So, because I was thinking earlier about this whole thing about like Timothy Aluros and Dioscoros starting to become venerated in the Kyivan Church. And because I was thinking analogously with something that we see in the Ethiopian Church, where, to use an example, we have this book called the Ta'amud Mariam, the Miracles of Mary, right? A compilation of several hundred miracles attributed to the Virgin Mary. And one of the miracles very explicitly refers to this saintly bishop of Rome for whom the miracle was worked, named Leo, obviously referring to Leo I, who wrote the Tome of Leo. Even though we also see, Ethiopian books that refute the so-called heresy of Leo. And to me, it would seem then that this is simply a sign of, they were so zealous in copying miracles that there wasn't discernment in terms of, who are these people that are being referred to. And I was thinking that it almost even reminds me of the Octavius. I don't know if anyone has read the Octavius. It's like a very niche text from the first few centuries in Africa. But so in the Octavius, there's this dialogue between a pagan and a Christian. It's written by a Christian, so you can tell that it's a sort of straw man argument. But the pagans, it praises Rome for erecting altars to even unknown gods. And then this is refuted by the Christian, that no, we have like one God and we know who we worship and these kind of things, right? And so I wonder if, firstly, that these kind of things aren't a sign of an overzealous attempt to add saints and miracles and things without discernment, and then also if that's not sort of erecting altars to unknown gods,
yeah.
Right? By extension.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all in favor of venerating saints, but I wonder if there needs to perhaps be discernment.
Certainly, in hagiography, that would basically comprise half of hagiography. The work of the Bolandists, of course, debunking so many. One point that I really didn't get into is the fact that in medieval Europe, the country with the most saints had the most wielded the most political power. So in Spain, they would convert the names of milestones into saints. And it was done very uncritically. When churches united with the Catholic Church or with the larger churches, founded by heretics, very often the names of the heretics, I'm not saying that the names of saints who were born under heresy, who can in no way be accused of heresy, but who were legitimate saints that were included, but the names of the heretics condemned by name by the churches, such as Arius, were included into the canon of the saints. Under June the 6th, there is one saint, or was one Saint Artotis. And the Bolandists looked at it and said, who in heaven's name is that? And he studied and studied, and he realized that an Arian copyist had inserted the name of the arch-heretic into the Catholic calendar. There were other examples of that. But again, you're absolutely right, that people wanted to have as many saints as possible, not only creating funny saints, but also taking over saints from other churches and saying they were ours. Why does, for example, the Church of Russia, and this is why the Ukrainian Orthodox Metropolitan Ilarion Nohoyenko wrote his book on Ukrainian saints. He said they've shaved off so many of our saints, have included them into their calendar. Now, certainly, the Ukrainian saints would have seen Russia as part of their mission field. They built churches in Russia. The Orthodox three-bar cross with the slanted footrest is a cross of Kyiv. The old believers and the czars really liked that cross because it was very unique. It signified the apostolic foundation of St. Andrew with his X-cross. But these were all from Ukraine that many Ukrainians have totally forgotten about and think that they're foreign elements. I mean, if you wear a three-bar cross with a slanted footrest, the Ukrainians will call you Russian. This has happened so many times. Many Ukrainian traditions that have taken over by Russians, not taken over, they were taught this by Ukrainian missionaries. And they use them. The Russian church uses these traditions. They call them Russian. But that doesn't mean that they actually are in the Muscovite sense. But in actual fact, all of the saints of Ukraine are known as Russian saints. In actual fact, the saints of Russia, especially those who were the children, the first fruits of the Kyivan missionary outreach, they are also to be included in the Ukrainian calendar. They are also saints of Ukraine. Many Saint Seraphim of Sarov, the great Saint Seraphim of Sarov, he was tonsured in the Kyivan caves Lavra. He was told by Saint Dositheus, in actual fact a woman who assumed the male clothing, he or she counseled him to go to Sarov, which he did. But he always regarded himself as a saint of the, or as a child of the Kyivan caves Lavra, even though he's Russia's great saint, and Saint Nicholas II carried his ark during his canonization in 1903. Saint Sorrow's icon is everywhere in Kyiv as well. But these are examples of saints that archaeologists, historians have discovered as they went into other countries. In Romania, and Paisie Velichkovsky is to this day called Saint Paisius of Romania. Recently, the Moldovan Orthodox Church canonized one Saint Ahafia of Moldavia, and had an order developed, a medal in her honor. She was an ethnic Ukrainian who happened to go into a Moldavian monastery, spoke Romanian, but if you're from the Bukovina area, you would speak Romanian, and she died as a saint there. In Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Germany, in Austria, in so many other places, to discover these saints and of their connection with their ethnic homeland, that ethnic homeland may or may not have been important to them after they worked in that mission outpost for as long as they did. I don't know. But the fact is they came from there. In the case of St. Paisie Velichkovsky, who dealt with Christians from 10 cultural groups, also including the Hutsuls, who were known as being a separate national group from the Ukraine, even though we consider them to be Ukrainians today. He always referred to himself as a native of Poltava. But in no way would he ever not refuse to work. He also worked with Chalcedonian Armenians, was one of the 10 groups. Armenians who accepted the Council of Chalcedon.
You mean Armenian Catholics?
No, the Armenian Orthodox who accepted the Chalcedonian. They never had their own bishop, but they were under him and in the Russian Church. Same thing, Assyrian Christians who were allowed to keep their own rite, but became members of the Russian Orthodox Church. Like in Chicago, and also there was a Russian missionary who I don't want to say converted, but brought them into communion with the Moscow
They were
Patriarchate.
Byzantinized, though. I thought that group you're talking about in the Russian Church.
They were heavily Byzantinized,
because
unfortunately.
There was a group that came in Georgia as well.
Yeah.
That they kept Syriac, but they celebrate the Byzantine liturgy.
Very much so, and that whole thing with the liturgy of St. James and the liturgy, the liturgy of St. James, and it's in a very Byzantinized form in the Ukrainian Church and Russian Church once a year, and it's the standard liturgy in the other Oriental churches. So yeah.
Well, this is, I must say, especially for the sake of the camera, that every time Dr. Roman answers a question, there are another 5 or 6 questions that come to mind, which simply means that we're going to have to invite him back. So this, I guess, is only part 1. We're going to bring him back. But even we promised you the last question.
I think you've underlined something very important, Professor. Usually we're used to thinking of looking at the lives of the saints as an example. But you said a very interesting phrase. You said the saints teach us how to pray. Perhaps in another essay presentation, you could actually give examples of how different monks and saints taught us how to
That would be, yes, that is actually quite brilliant on your part, because that is exactly the real value of the saint to contemporary people. We have really been cutting down on the amount and quality of our prayer life. I believe it was Father Roman Dusanovsky doing recollectie at St. Demetrius. He's a very colorful individual. He held up a tablet with the phone number of the bishop, and he said, if you don't like what I have to say, here is who you call. And then he said, and as for the peace, as for the fast, it's not just about not eating, okay? If you just do that, then you're on a diet. That's all it is. It's a diet. There's prayer, there's scriptural reading, there's meditation, there's forgiveness. But that is exactly it. The saints, how they prayed is why they became saints. And if we pray like that, then we too, we won't need to use even critical history. We'll be able to perform miracles ourselves. If we can pray all night, I'm not saying that that's a gift of the Spirit, but like Saint Jonah, if we can pray as other saints prayed, that grace, that energy. It's like when I was at Queen's Park, we had a new computer and it wouldn't work. And we got the IT people up pushing buttons all galore. And I looked under the desk and there was a problem. It wasn't plugged into the wall. But isn't that what a Christian is? We have all these charismata that are bequeathed to us in baptism and chrismation and in our relationship with the Holy Trinity in life. And yet without a prayer life, all that is dormant in us. We have it within us. We have miracle working powers within us. But a strong, vibrant prayer life is what wakes it up. And we won't need proof. We'll become the proof. When we pray for other people, my pharmacist said that her husband has a neck problem and gives all kinds of medications and things under the table and everything. Nothing works. And I said that there's a certain shrine in Toronto. I said, go there. You should pray there. 4 weeks later, I come back to pick up my medication. And she says, oh, it's you. And I said, yes, it is. And she said, she comes, she hugs me, and he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I said, ma'am, what are you thanking me for? And he said, I went to the shrine with my husband. He knelt down, he prayed for half an hour, the pain is gone. He only thinks about the Mother of God. He wants to pray the prayers of the Byzantine liturgy to her, and he's so thankful, and he's become like a spiritual musical bear. And I'm taking my aunt there next, she said.
On what you wrote?
Yeah.
Father Peter, if you went up there, please.
Not recently.
Can you come by and take them up?
Yes, I can.
I was there a couple of years ago, but I don't know.
But
your heart needs it now.
You've been there?
I'm not the one with the heart problem.
Well, okay, no, I was just wondering why you knew all that.
I'm going to be healed.
Father Tsibolista of the Bazarians was there, and when I was there once, he had 3 medical certificates in his hand, and we were talking about it, and he said, well, look at this. And he said, these are 3 medical certificates for miracles of healing that happened this week alone. And I said, well, how does it happen? He said, well, he gave his blessing. Then he said, and go pray before the shrine. Now, it is a statue. Nothing we can really do about that. I mean, I would prefer an icon. But it was like in Lou, L-A-U-S in France, which was approved by Pope Benedict XVI. It was a 15-year-old girl, Benoit Rancourel. And she was seeing visions of the Mother of God. And people were coming there, going to confession. The Mother of God said, people need to go to confession and confess everything. Don't hold anything back. And the people were coming in droves, thousands. And the church got together and started questioning this 15-year-old shepherdess who had never been to school. He said, okay, tell us, you're doing this to make money. Come clean. And she said, no, the lady that I meet with is very real, and she tells me what she wants me to do. He said, okay, well then you go back to your lady when you see her next and ask her what she wants us to do here. And she said, fine. The next day, 15 bishops and theologians are sitting there in judgment over this poor little 15-year-old scrawny girl. And she said, did you speak with your lady? And she said, yes, I did. And what did she say? And he says, my lady said, or the lady said, that you bishops of the church have power over my son, because every morning you call him down from heaven onto your altars in Holy Communion. But when it comes to me, you have no power. I do what I want, when I want, where I want, how I want. And half of them got on their knees, and the other half stood up and were amazed at this. She became a nun. That shrine was approved by Pope Benedict XVI. And she continued to see have daily visitations of the Virgin Mary for 54 years. And she received the gift as people were lining up to go to confession, and thousands went there just to go to confession. She'd be able to read people's thoughts. And she would actually tap people on the shoulder and said, I know that that is a very difficult sin for you to confess, but remember to confess it or else your confession will be invalid. And she had this, and when Pope Benedict, because it was considered to be, not a valid thing, but he approved it and opened the way for her beatification. Well.